Welcome to the Examining Cafe Value for DraftKings for Week 6. I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11. With me is Russell Clay at Russell J. Clay. Russ broke down the value, top three at each position for this week. How are you feeling about kind of the overall grouping here?
I think this is a really important week for, quote unquote value. I think a lot of people are looking to pay down off Antonio Brown, looking to pay off the top receivers, maybe look at some value wide receivers. Honestly, I'm trying to scrounge together whatever I can to get Antonio Brown in my lineups because this is going to be the lowest ownership percentage he's going to have in like a long time,
You look at this and go, like, he's still going to have probably what?
20% probably.
Which is like, for Brown's ownership standards, that's low.
Yeah.
Are you forcing him in, or are you just going to be kind of playing it by how it goes in terms of?
I'm not forcing him in, but instead of going with the full stack of him and Roethlisberger, I think I'm just getting Antonio Brown exposure. That's going to be how I play that, especially with the Sammy Coates news of maybe he's limited with that finger. So I think him and Bell are tremendous, and I'm going to do whatever I can to get them in.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Steelers, obviously one of the higher totals of the week. Expensive options, but in terms of floor and ceiling, they're the best on the board. Mm-hmm. Quarterback here, looking at a pretty interesting group. Tyrod Taylor, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford. Obviously, Matthew Stafford, I think, is the one we expected kind of maybe a little bit higher salary on, and that's kind of priced a little bit lower than I saw.
So he's not someone that clicked into my mind. But now, with his weapons sort of, and Theo Riddick and Eric Ebron are out now. So make a note of that. But with that considered, this just makes Stafford much easier to stack with, much easier to throw Marvin Jones in there, much easier to throw Anquan Bolden and Golden Tate in there. Because nobody's stealing those targets. Cole Wick could certainly, ruin some lives, but there's no running game. Zach Zenner and Dwayne Washington are cool with me, but, they're not going to steal a ton. They're going to be throwing the Rams, they're beat up on the front four right now with some of their secondary pieces. They're non-Aaron Donald, Robert Quinn pieces. And their secondary is terrible. So, while Stafford himself doesn't have a great matchup, I think you could use him and Marvin Jones together at a pretty cheap price and make some fun lineups for sure.
Especially kind of, we'll get into a couple of guys later, but in terms of correlation and game stacks, that may be one of the more contrarian ones to go with, adding the piece in.
Oh, yeah. You're going to get some low ownership in that game for sure.
Tyrod Taylor, Kirk Cousins, both pop up as under 6K guys. Does either one kind of intrigue you more than the other?
No, not Kirk Cousins. Absolutely not. Go away, Kirk Cousins. With Jordan Reed, if Jordan Reed wasn't out, I would have at least thought about it. With Jordan Reed potentially out, I'm not even going to mess with that. Pat Thorman threw out a good tweet earlier today talking about Jamison Crowder and what his potential workload's going to look like without Jordan Reed. I think that's an interesting way to get exposure to Kirk Cousins. But other than that, I don't really think it's a Deshaun Jackson week. Even though it is Philly, you can play that narrative street, but just in terms of the matchup, I don't love it. So that overall, not something I'm intrigued in. I'm okay with Tyrod. I just don't know if there's the upside without Watkins. With Watkins, I don't mind him, but, without him and Robert Woods and Charles Clay there, who does he have to pass to get those 2 or 3 passing touchdowns? We know he's not going to throw for 350, 400 yards or anything crazy. He really needs that rushing yardage. I just think this is a McCoy game rather than a Tyrod game,
He needs like 60 yards on the ground in the rushing touchdown to really...
least, for tournaments. And I get it's 5,300, he really only needs 20 in a tournament, but, I don't know.
You're kind of putting some pressure around some other guys around you if he pretty easy price tag to pay off, but you're looking probably for a little bit more on this week, especially with a lot of quarterbacks in good spots.
Mm-hmm.
So running backs, Le'Veon Bell, which not value, but it seems, pay that bad boy off.
Oh, I think that's value. 7,900, compared to how wide receivers are priced. If you guys don't know, Le'Veon Bell literally is a slot receiver on probably 30% of his snaps now. It's just absolutely ridiculous how good he is to get. Honestly, 6 receptions a game. I really do believe that, like average for the rest of the year. This matchup is just unreal. The workload might not even be there. I could see, 18 touches, but I could also see 150 yards and 2 touchdowns on those 18 touches. So that's going to be the type of game we're looking at here. I just think you do whatever you can to get him in, whether it's in the running back position or the flex. You just look at the high end wide receivers. How many high end wide receivers have his floor?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you look at when you match up salary. I mean, it's a little bit different take on it. So I think that's how you kind of view it too. And you look and you go the Steelers thing. It's 2,100 less than Brown. So it's like if you want that exposure, you can still use Bell for a cheaper price tag.
Absolutely. And I mean, we saw last week, his floor is 20. It really is. It really is. And it's stupid to say that, but it really is,
He's yet to find the end zone, yet he's putting up 20 points worth of yardage and catches.
The 30 and 35 DK point games are coming, especially when the touchdowns come. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Jalen Richard pops up next, 3,800. It looks at a couple of guys here, Bobby Rainey as well, who's super cheap. Any of those kind of intrigue you as a punt?
I don't hate Jalen Richard, but I don't like it either. It's just not. It's okay. It's not like 38. If he was 3K again, I would look at it. But 38 is just. What's your ceiling there, for touches? Again, I think it's going to be the same situation, even with Latavius out. I'm not buying it. I just look to Crabtree and Cooper in that offense, and I think that's all you really need to do there. Bobby Rainey, though, 33 in an offense that desperately needs someone. He's got that passing down role. We saw last week, getting those catches throughout the game. Really, really consistent role. So I'm okay with him at 33. I think especially if you play that Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, and you want to get some decent non-total punt options, I think you can throw him in there and be okay. So, yeah, I don't mind that.
Look, I mean, I think we focus on this week. I feel like there's a lot more guys below 4K than we've usually talked about over the previous 5 weeks. And this might be the week we need them the most.
It's absolutely true. If we had Jarek and I knew, like the same matchup as last week, obviously it's bad process, but we need that type of guy this week, and we just don't really have it.
Right. I mean, look at the wide receiver here next, and this is where we were talking about the possible correlation of like a Lions-Rams stack, because Austin has some buzz, Britt not so much, Jones has some buzz, but kind of pairing a couple together and kind of mixing and matching, that could be an interesting one if this game really goes back and forth.
Absolutely. Again, we look at target share, we look at how efficient players are on their targets. One thing I think people need to keep in mind with yards per target and, looking into deeper stats, you have to have the right context of what they mean. Especially with the defenses players are playing, that obviously affects, what players look like. The Rams have played some of the toughest defenses in the league so far this year. They have a terrible quarterback. This is the type of matchup where Tavon, can break that 50, 60-yard, screen pass. It's not going to happen really against the Cardinals or like the Seahawks or, all these tough defenses are not going to miss assignments on the reg. Detroit, however, is bad on defense, and they're going to continue to be bad. I had a hard time talking myself into Kenny Britt, but that's not a bad play. I wouldn't play 2 in the same lineup because it's going to be 1, I think. I don't think it's going to be both. I don't think that's a viable strategy to play both. you're just looking for one to hit in a punt type of play. But I think with Tavon, you can play the Rams defense with it. Hope he gets that punt return. That's going to happen 1 or 2 times a year. So you don't know when, but I do like that. The other guy mentioned here, Brandon LaFell. So sometimes fantasy points don't need to be had in good ways. You know what I mean? And Brandon LaFell already has 7 red zone targets this year. Two red zone touchdowns. Obviously not a great player, but he's being put in the position to have fantasy relevant weeks. And as we've seen against this Patriots team, especially with that Dolphins game a few weeks back, just smoke them at home. They're going to be in comeback mode. If they don't, they're still a little susceptible to those secondary pieces on defense. So I do like that. I know it's Brendan LaFell, but he's 32. If he's 39, yeah, not talking about him. 32 though. I mean, I'm a big Chris Conley guy this week, but based on who's going to get more targets and everything, I think LaFell's actually a pretty decent bet.
And you got to look at game flow. I mean, I think that's going to set up a lot of passing, especially with Jeremy Hill limited. I don't think that's really the big storyline anyway. I think it's just the fact that Brady's probably going to throw, 4 touchdowns in the first half and have Dalton throwing a ton.
I mean, I honestly think he could. Yeah.
So, yeah, in terms of a kind of a correlation game flow type play, I mean, he could be one. Tight end, we're looking at some cheap guys here. Gary Barnidge, pretty cheap at 3,300. Questionable, but I haven't seen anything that really limits him for week 6 here.
Yeah, I mean, as you've kind of mentioned the last few weeks, I don't really like going at this Titans team anymore. I did early in the year, but they're kind of not horrible, and we got a decent sample size now that, they are an improved defense and not just giving up these huge weeks. I mean, I've been losing lineups because of guys, you look at Hopkins a few weeks ago, a bunch of other guys throughout the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season have been shut down by them. So I don't mind Gary Barnidge if he plays at 33, just because that's a nice value. But overall, I'm not really in on the Browns this week. And I will say, Zach Ertz popped up here. I'm fading him, for better or worse. After last week,
that was a sassy fade. I'm fading him. I'm fading.
No,
I'm curving. Don't let Zach Ertz come up in Russ's DMs because he's going to put the curve on.
Don't get 3 targets the week before and expect me to want to, invest. I like Zach Ertz. I love Zach Ertz. I have him in a season-long leagues and all that jazz, but in terms of this, you got to give it another week. In terms of seeing what his target share is, I guess he's a tournament play, but I don't trust it right now. I like his potential role in the offense, but they really like to spread it out. If I'm gonna take a chance, it would probably be more with Darren Sproles at running back because we need that value running back than an Ertz where there's a lot of values at tight end.
I think this one might be shaping up to be just an ugly game in terms of offensive football.
I think so. And you want to go at this Washington defense, but who do you go at it with?
I think it's the backs.
Like I've been trying.
That's where I'm looking to.
I've been trying to go at, teams with Jordan Matthews and Zach Ertz, but that's not how the world works sometimes. So I think I'm going to take, the week off from the Philadelphia offense other than maybe Matthews or Sproles.
What about Zach Miller here? I mean, he's 200 less than Ertz. More of a possible.
I dig. I like it. You worry about Jalen Ramsey for that secondary already becoming a premium secondary player, but the rest of that group is okay. We saw Hunter Henry have a decent week against them, I think, or maybe it was Antonio Gates. I remember that Chargers game. The tight ends had good games. And I think, Zach Miller, in terms of what he does and what he is in that offense, especially in the red zone, without Kevin White, I know he's going to have really high ownership. I think Zach Miller is a great hedge off that.
I do too. I mean, I like him in cash. I mean, especially if you're using Hoyer as well. I think that's the pair up I want to make, and then get my exposure elsewhere to other teams.
Mhm.
So I think that's just kind of a cheap way to go. Defenses, yikes.
Well, as they say, some things in life are ugly, and you can't change that. Can't change some things. You just can't change. Well, what the caveat value is trying to do here is find some value, and on a week that there's not much value in defenses. So I will say, looking at the Bears and the Colts, they are so cheap. And against offenses that have been really inconsistent this year, obviously, Jacksonville for the Bears and Houston for the Colts. The problem is, Hoyer's looked pretty good, and Bortles, if that game gets going, like Bortles is going to have those touchdowns by the end of the game, I think. And with Osweiler, I just don't think the Colts have the personnel to shut down, Hopkins and Lamar Miller for a full game. So I think you can take a risk on the Colts. I might make one if you need that extra 700, but I don't know how desperate I'm going to be for that 700 to pay, for the Colts defense.
I mean, they're legitimately, as a Colts fan, they're legitimately one of the worst defenses in the league.
Now, I will say I like the Chiefs D call. I like Oakland. I think they could run them out, but they're a great tournament defense. We've seen that already this year. They just crush certain teams. Do I think Derek Carr in Oakland is that team they crush? No, but without those running backs, without Latavius Murray, maybe they can focus in a little more on the pass and get some pass rush. It's quite a bit. So I think that could be interesting.
I think that's the thing with Derek Carr right now is that offensive line very solid. We've yet to see him really be uneasy in the pocket so far, and he's been super efficient throughout this year already. Obviously the weapons are there. Obviously, we know Kansas City. Their corners have been a little bit hit or miss. That was supposed to be a strong suit in terms of kind of backing up until they get some guys back from injury, but we've yet to see it really just only in that one game.
Absolutely.
And Derek Carr is not Ryan Fitzpatrick.
No, I know. He's not.
So that's going to wrap things up with the DraftKings Cafe value for week 6. Be sure to head on over to dailyfantasycafe.com. Check out our great tools and content.